Great. We are live. Welcome to the February 14th Clean Water Board meeting. Happy Valentine's Day. Today we are going to walk through our welcome, overview of the agenda, review the consent agenda. Then I'm going to turn it over to Nick Kramer, who's the Agency of Administration Chief Operating Officer, to give us an overview of the Clean Water Fund operating statement. And then we will review the proposed adjusted state fiscal year 26 clean water budget recommendation, which is currently going through the legislative process. And we'll give an overview of some of the ongoing legislative session priorities and areas of engagement, and preview the upcoming state fiscal year 2027 clean water budget process with some time for board discussion and input. Then we'll open it up for public comment, and then wrap up and close out the meeting with a summary of next steps, some other announcements and reminders, wrapping up by 9:30 today. Any questions or suggestions on the agenda before we dive in? Okay, thank you. And I believe just acknowledging that we have on the consent agenda today the approval of the December 3rd, 2024 meeting minutes. Unless there's any discussion on that item, I think we can just handle that by way of consent agenda. I'll pause for a moment in case there's any discussion. Okay. We will kick off the content of the meeting now with an overview of the updated operating statement, and Nick Kramer, who's in the room with me, will be leading that agenda item.
Okay, thanks, Emily. And good morning, everybody. Good to see some of you. Some of you guys are spotlighted, others are hidden in the virtual background. But happy Friday. So I just wanted to start actually before jumping into the meat of the discussion here by acknowledging, so this will probably be my last presentation of the operating statement. I know as thrilling as this has been, I've transitioned roles in the Agency of Administration. And so Tim Mateer, who is on the call, not visible on our end, but at least a set of initials in there, it will be the new budget analyst working to help support the Clean Water Board. So he's on the call. Wanted to introduce Tim to everybody. He's our principal analyst.
Tim is on camera, and I think he was maybe were you trying to say something, Tim? I can see him here, but you can't see him. Okay. Sorry to interrupt you.
No, good. Okay, anyways, just wanted to name that. So this update was done. It was a team effort by myself and Tim. And so moving forward, you will probably be seeing more of Tim and be in his very capable hands. But so for my last update here, I wish I had better news, but the high level upshot of the most recent e-board upgrade or update, I should say. So a refresher for everybody, the e-board is a group comprised of the governor and the chairs of the money committees, and right, or maybe I'm confusing with the Joint Fiscal Office. It's made of.
You're correct, Nick.
That's correct, Doug. Thank you. So there are legislators. There's the governor. They get together typically twice a year or as needed. One of the things that they do is accept the consensus revenue forecast that's prepared jointly by the legislature's chief economist and the administration's economist. And that, based on their projections, typically we then update the clean water operating statement and projected revenues. Since clean water surcharge and meals and rooms tax are typically tied to revenues that they track. So a reorientation to this operating statement, the green columns labeled January 2024 revenue update, those are the updates that we would have had this time last year after we had delivered the FY25 clean water budget. The purple columns are the information that we got in July when the e-board met and upgraded the forecast, which were the basis for the preparation of this board's clean water budget recommendations. So in those green columns, You can see the total revenue, or sorry, in those purple columns, the total revenues for FY25 were 28,767,000. That's in line G. The way the budget, which had already been passed, shook out. If you go to the bottom of that column, though, that amount of revenue meant that we were projecting to leave a little over $7 million on the bottom line. That's in line AI, 7028050. Then that amount would carry forward to the next year and be added to the revenues for FY26 we were projecting as of July, which is 28.9 million. That's in line G in the purple column under FY26. You add the 28.9 to the 7 million and you get some total that I don't have off the top of my head, but 36-ish and change. And that was the amount that, to the dollar, this board recommended spending in FY26 between one-time appropriations and base appropriations. So this year, the Clean Water Board's recommendation spent every dollar of projected available revenue, which is certainly a balanced budget within our rights. The issue was that in the most recent January forecast, there were some downward adjustments to the meals and rooms tax projection. So if you look in it's the orange column for FY25, you can see that the total amount of revenue for meals and rooms dropped slightly from 14,748 from 15,762 to 15,708. That's a drop of, I think, $54,000. So that amount trickles down to the bottom line, leaving less unallocated and unreserved at the end of FY25. Then, in addition to that, the meals and rooms tax projection was also lowered in FY26 from 16,326 to 16,260. That is about $66,000. So the $54,000 reduction and the $66,000 reduction combined mean that, based on the projected spending in the Clean Water Board's recommended budget, which was adopted in its entirety in the governor's recommended budget, we are now budgeting $120 deficit, $120,000 deficit, which, for a variety of reasons, I think is probably not great, certainly not best financial practice to be deficit budgeting. This is a special fund. There is some flexibility in terms of the fund balance, but typically, at least on an appropriations basis, there's very little precedent for deficit budgeting. You want your plan at least to be balanced. So I'll stop there. There were some changes also to FY27, but obviously we don't have any revenue actions, any expenditure actions planned yet for FY27. That's a conversation this board can revisit over the summer. That is all, I think, to set the table. I would just add the other thing that the Department of Finance and Management, in collaboration with the Department of Taxes, do throughout the year is track the actual expenditures, the actual revenues coming into the fund. Tax sends us a monthly update of how many abandoned bottle deposits are coming in and what the property transfer tax actually is. And typically that's, we just keep an eye on it. Over the last couple of years, it's been primarily good news. Occasionally, based on seasonal swings, we'll dip a little bit below forecast, then we'll climb back up. So I haven't sounded the alarm in a big way on those updates. Typically, I would note that at this point, we're about halfway through the year on FY25, and actual revenues to date have been tracking slightly lower than forecast. We're about $1 million behind. We're only halfway through the year. Tax receipts vary. There's some seasonal variability. I don't think that warrants any kind of panic or anything yet. But I think it's important context as we look at this projected budget deficit and think about actions moving forward, just to have in the back of our heads that we are also tracking slightly below expectations, even on this updated forecast. So I'll stop there and take any questions if there are any on technical pieces, and I'm certainly happy to jump back in later as we discuss any sort of proposal to address this. I see Jim had a hand up.
Yeah. Thank you, Nick. Jim?
Yeah, I guess I would change the presentation. Instead of there's a deficit, the projected reserve of $2.5 million is now reduced by the reduced revenue, not that there's a real deficit.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. I appreciate that reminder, and it's true that we have this buffer. This board could take an action to formally utilize that reserve. I mean, I think the way that it's written, it kind of happens automatically if we were to close the fiscal year with less revenue than we were anticipating. So yes, no, thank you. There are some guardrails and some cushion in place.
And just putting in a plug for the contingency reserve guidelines that are posted on the website. Nick is correct that would kind of automatically come into play if revenues ever resulted in an actual deficit. We discussed this a little bit, and since the state fiscal year 26 budget is still under review and has not yet been passed, that it would be timely to make this minor adjustment. But I don't mean to get ahead of the agenda either, just in terms of precedent and trying to keep with the balanced budget.
I think too, if I can just add on that, I mean, certainly the Clean Water Fund is its own beast. I mean, very few special funds have their own public budgeting process and a board kind of supervising. So I don't mean to lean too heavily into precedent elsewhere. I mean, we do have reserves in like the general fund, the transportation fund, the education fund. In those cases, and obviously, like Emily just mentioned, we have guidelines on how the reserve would be utilized. We don't typically deficit budget in those funds, knowing that we have a reserve that could help mitigate. We always, I mean, we, the state and the legislature, typically try to present balanced budgets, and then the reserves kind of exist for the eventuality that the revenues come in less than the current expectation. So it's within the board's purview, I think, to go whichever route they want. But I just wanted to add that context that on a budgetary basis, I think the majority of the precedent is to try to present a balanced budget.
Mm-hmm. You, Nick, and we're going to miss having you as part of these meetings, but glad you're not going too far, and welcome, Tim. Any other questions on the operating statement before we carry on with the agenda? Okay, so with that, I am going to move us on to the next page in the supporting materials, and Secretary Moore is going to review the proposed adjusted state fiscal year 2026 clean water budget. Where we see that the highlighted cells are the adjusted cells of this agenda item. Involves updating the draft budget based on the operating statement report out that Nick just shared, and then we'll have some time for board discussion before we do our action item. So thank you, Secretary Moore.
Sorry, I was muted. I don't know if it's helpful since there's so many folks participating remotely to zoom in a little bit more. And I don't know if that can be done conveniently.
Absolutely. And I also apologize. I realized that my pointer wasn't showing up during the operating statement. I wish that I could have a little laser pointer to help folks navigate a little bit better. But yes, I'll try to fit this in a little bit better. Thanks for bearing with me.
All right. That looks really good. So, we are currently in the position of having a relatively modest gap that we are proposing this morning to address. And have targeted what we had created was that line item for non-federal match. It wasn't committed to specific projects, but rather acknowledged that there are significant or have been significant federal funding opportunities available to Vermont, and wanted to make sure, as discussed at previous meetings, that we were well positioned to take advantage of those federal funds that often require a modest state match, most typically between 20 and 25%. Appreciating that there is a lot of change in process at the federal level, and there may not be need for these dollars, as well as the fact that they weren't committed to specific projects, that we are proposing to take the reduction from that particular line item, as opposed to other elements of the budget that are more explicitly directed to either projects or ongoing initiatives that sort of operate in anticipation of a consistent level of support. I think I can pause there, Emily, and see if folks have questions or concerns about where we are proposing to take that reduction.
Thank you, Secretary Moore. Any questions or discussion? Okay, I'm not seeing any. Secretary Moore, unless there's additional information you'd like to share, shall we move on to taking to the draft motion for this agenda item?
I think that makes sense, and I am happy to make that motion, Emily, that we reduce the non-federal match line item in the proposed FY26 clean water budget by $120,000 to $730,000.
Thank you, Secretary Moore. Do we have a second? Bob Flint? Any discussion? Or maybe I should have said any opposition? Sorry, my Robert's rules are a little rusty. Any discussion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, the motion is passed. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily.
Okay. The next agenda item is to give an overview of the legislative session priorities and engagement, and Secretary Moore will be leading us through this agenda item today as well.
So what we thought we could do this morning is provide an update on several bills that are in active discussion at the legislature that have strong connections to the work of the Clean Water Board. I will say this isn't an exhaustive list. As folks may or may not be aware, my understanding is Legislative Council has received over 1,000 drafting requests for bills from legislators. Many of those, just by virtue of their numbers, will stay, as we say, on the wall, meaning they won't be taken up for active discussion. So we're really focused on the ones that we believe are likely to see debate and possible votes this session. The first two will absolutely receive votes, but then S24 is one where it's a little bit more of a question mark but wanted to make sure you're aware. So the budget we just discussed has connections into two different bills that make their way through the legislature. One is the appropriations bill, sometimes referred to as the big bill. The governor introduced his recommended budget back at the end of January, and it is currently in front. So I muted myself, sorry. And currently in front of the House Appropriations Committee. And ANR will be testifying about our parts of that budget, I believe, next week. It is consistent with the budget that the board passed. The governor's recommend looks identical to what we had recommended to him. Also included in the budget can be language around budget-related policy initiatives. And the governor in his budget also did propose the repeal of the sunset on the property transfer tax, which is currently scheduled to come into effect July 1st, 2027. Obviously, that is an important source of revenue for our clean water work. We have a set of obligations with EPA that stretch out for 20 years. And so having 10-year money for 20 years worth of work didn't make a lot of sense. And I'm hopeful the legislature will act on this year as it becomes important in our future budget planning processes. In addition, there are resources reflected in the budget table that are part of the capital bill. The capital bill is bonded dollars. And as you may recall, we focus that on infrastructure type projects. So it includes things like some of our wastewater investments, as well as some of the on-farm infrastructure. The capital bill starts in the House Institutions Committee, and staff from ANR will be providing initial testimony on the capital bill today, in fact, in front of the House Institutions Committee. The final bill we wanted to make sure you were all aware of is S24, which would be proposing changes related to the 3-acre stormwater program. The 3-acre stormwater program is a regulatory program that ANR put in place in response to some of the obligations we have with EPA for the Lake Champlain TMDL and Lake Memphremagog TMDL. This bill would provide different financing mechanisms or make different financing mechanisms available to municipalities that may want to support 3-acre sites in doing their work, as well as provides additional time for 3-acre sites to come into full compliance. And then finally, would make 3-acre properties eligible for Tier 1 funding in the clean water budget. Some of these changes, I would say, enjoy support from the agency. Certainly, we have concerns about adding 3-acre stormwater sites as a Tier 1 priority for the Clean Water Fund in statute. That would change the way we need to think about distributing our resources. And it would direct $5 million into that fund as sort of startup money. As currently drafted, it would take it from the current year budget, which is also problematic, but we are actively working with the bill sponsor to try to address that concern and make sure that they are aware that that would come at the expense of other project commitments the Clean Water Program has already made. Maybe before jumping into the next bill, Emily can pause there and see if folks have questions about any of those first three.
Thank you, Secretary Board. Any questions? Secretary Moore, would it be okay if I just add one piece to the S24?
Absolutely.
I also just want to share that in statute currently, we have 2 other statutory grant programs that are in our statutory priorities for municipal stormwater implementation grants and developed lands implementation grants. And so this new grant program that's contemplated in S24 would have overlap in that space. And so that's an additional piece that we'll need to kind of workshop and figure out how it all fits together if this were to move forward. Okay, thank you. I don't see any hands or questions in the chat. Oh wait, let me just double check the chat. I have a problem. Oh no, we're good. Thank you. I'll move down to the next row then.
Thank you. This next bill deals with what has been referred to sometimes as the de-delegation petition. As many folks are likely aware, the Conservation Law Foundation filed a complaint with the EPA back in 2022 regarding the failure of ANR to issue any CAFO permits, concentrated animal feeding operations. We have been working with the Ag Agency and with EPA over the last more than 2 years now in an effort to resolve the concerns raised under the dedelegation petition, up to and including submitting a draft corrective action plan in late 2024. We received feedback from the EPA in the middle of January and are working to prepare a revised corrective action plan that responds to some of the feedback they provided. We believe we will be able to satisfy those directives, but at the same time, the Conservation Law Foundation has worked with select members of the legislature to propose a wholesale transfer from the Ag Agency to ANR of all regulatory authorities in the ag water quality space. Our proposal would affect much more modest changes and simply create a CAFO program and require farms that have direct discharges to seek coverage under that program. We do need a set of legislative changes in order to sort of be consistent with current federal statute and have the authorities necessary to administer those permits. So there will be some legislative activity in this space. The administration's bill hasn't been introduced yet, but just wanted to flag for folks that this is out here, and again will be an area, I believe, of active discussion during the legislative session.
Thank you. And then moving on.
And then the last bill, and this is one I am less certain will be taken up and discussed, would propose a wholesale repeal of the 3-acre stormwater requirement. We've tried to be very clear with the legislature that the pounds of phosphorus pollution that program is intended to address need to come from somewhere. And so to the extent they repeal the 3-acre stormwater program, we would need to look elsewhere to gain those reductions. And 3-acre stormwater was sort of our program of last resort. We know that those projects are challenging and expensive. And I am concerned that the alternative would be even more complicated and expensive than what we have in front of us. I think this proposal also raises some significant equity issues. At this point, while only a few entities have implemented the 3-acre stormwater projects fully, we have several hundred that have gone through or in various stages of the design process, many with contracts for construction this coming field season. I don't anticipate that this bill will gain traction. I believe the legislature is likely to focus their attention on S24 and trying to modify the program and provide additional flexibilities. But again, felt important to flag this bill for the Clean Water Board.
Thank you, Secretary Gore. Any questions or discussion?
Emily, I could add a little color commentary, Secretary, if that works by you.
Sure.
Yeah, so just would like to share with the board my perspective. I'm kind of working this part of our policy and funding portfolio for Secretary Moore, and this is seeing a lot of energy. There's been a little bit of chatter and sort of digger and news on this, but there's been a lot of public incoming commentary to our legislators, to some of us in the agency, as the full suite of the requirements under the 3-acre program kind of come to fruition. So something I think will happen in the General Assembly, and I think what it's going to be incumbent on me working with the administration and with Secretary Moore and others to kind of get the best possible set of modifications. And as Secretary Moore noted, there's been a number of conversations with the bill sponsors and some other senators around that. So we are working to adjust the things that don't look so good, but expect something. I would not be surprised if there was some sort of a movement to fund that grant program in some manner or another, which would be, an action that would be not what the Clean Water Board is recommending with the Clean Water Fund for this year. But I just wanted to sort of offer that's a moving part right now. So
Mhm.
thank you, Julie.
Thanks, Neil.
Thank you, Neil. Any other questions or comments?
One thing I would add, Emily, is just that crossover when these bills have to move from one body to the other is the week after town meeting. So about 4 weeks from right now. And so we will know whether any of the bills on the list, but really either S-24 or the full repeal bill gain legs and move from one body to another. At some point, it may be important to reconvene the Clean Water Board just in light of any changes to our budget that occur as a result, and make sure that we have a shared plan for moving forward.
Excellent. Thanks for that. Okay, we will stay tuned as the legislative session rolls out. Okay, with that, I think we'll move on to our next agenda item, which is to preview the upcoming state fiscal year 2027 clean water budget process. So I have this draft process timeline to present to you all today. It looks pretty similar to what we've used in prior years, but we'll walk you through it with one new addition that we'd like to propose. And then we'd love to open it up for discussion by the board if there's any suggestions or comments. We had a chance to debrief a little bit on the most recent budget process and have made some minor adjustments here based on that, but really welcome board input as we set the process for the upcoming budget cycle. So just a quick orientation of how this is structured. We have items in yellow are an action of the emergency board. Items in gray are in action of the administration and state agencies. Green is action of the Clean Water Board, and blue is action of the legislature. So usually we would start off our budget process with the e-board meeting that happens in late July, and we get our updated revenue forecast. And then we would move into the process of getting an updated operating statement and doing some budget development work with the interagency work group. But this year, we're proposing to move to the very beginning of the budget process, an additional Clean Water Board meeting that would help us to set the strategy for the upcoming budget development process. So this would give us an opportunity to convene at a really big picture and hear input from the board in terms of strategy and direction for the upcoming budget. And then we can take that direction and bring that to the interagency work group and integrate that input from the board through our budget drafting process. And then the board would, as usual, convene again in October and kick off the budget public comment process by reviewing what is the draft budget and approving it to be posted for public comment. And then we would move through the public comment, the 30-day public comment process as typical. We're planning to, again, post this for public comment through an online questionnaire and to host a public hearing, which is also a meeting of the board. And that the hearing typically happens in early November. And then we would compile the public comments and present them to the board in late November. And then the board would reconvene in early December to finalize its budget recommendation based on public comment. And then the board would transmit that that final recommended budget to the agency of administration. Agencies bake the board's recommended budget into their budget materials that go to the administration. And then that gets folded into the governor's proposed budget presentation to the legislature in January. And then it goes through the legislative review process from roughly January through April. as what currently brings us here today, the emergency board meets in late January. We have our check-in on revenue forecast, see if any modifications need to be made. And then we get the updated operating statement. The board meets in February. I got a little bit ahead of myself there. And we check in with the board on the governor's recommended budget, review the operating statement, and see if any adjustments need to be made. And then typically in May, sometimes early June timeframe, the legislative authorization of the budget, and then state agencies receive spending authority to begin implementing the budget in July. So other than this new board meeting at the very beginning, everything else is pretty consistent with what we've done in prior years. But we're really interested in hearing the board's feedback on this additional step in the process. And when we had a chance to discuss with Chair Farnham and Secretary Moore, a couple of examples of some strategic direction or policy discussion that might come up in that new board meeting that's on our minds for this year would be to check in on the status of some of the other funding that's intersecting the clean water space in the resilience and disaster recovery space, and see how we can leverage across those two sectors of funding and how work can be coordinated in that intersecting space. And then another idea that came up was acknowledging that the clean water budget, we've had a few years with a decent amount of unallocated unreserved to program as one-time funds, but we're expecting that the budget will continue to feel a little bit tighter in the coming years, and raising a discussion around guiding principles for leveraging and cost share through the clean water budget and the policy that is set as part of the budget process. So just to give a little bit of a preview of a couple of items that are on our minds for that June to August timeframe board meeting, and would welcome your thoughts on this new approach. And of course, a lot can happen in between now and June, July, August. So those priority topics for discussion are of course subject to change depending on what happens with the legislative session at the federal level as well. So yeah, I'll pause there and see Chair Farnham, Secretary Moore, if there's anything you'd like to add, and then we can open it up for discussion and questions.
I was gonna say, I felt confident that we'd have plenty to talk about in one additional meeting in that time frame. It's likely we'll have to make some adjustments at the state level based on a lot of the turbulence at the federal level. If things happen sooner than that, we can always, try to set up a board meeting sooner. But I do think just having the expectation that we'll kind of collect some of those issues and react to them in that time frame was mentally helpful for me, because otherwise we're trying to react to every single issue or piece of information that comes up, and I think it'll also be useful for us to come together to give the interagency working group, if there's any change in how we'd like things approached, any direction, I think that'd be helpful for them to hear. So that is more of an ongoing, not situational. I think there's still value in that extra meeting each year at the beginning of the process. I don't know.
Thank you so much for adding that reactive piece, because I just acknowledge that once we get into the public comment process, the timeline really drives a lot. And so when we hear really excellent input from the board, it can limit our ability to really be as responsive as we'd like to be. And so this is intended to be a proactive opportunity for us to have that level of engagement and input when it's not as time sensitive. And then we would have the summer to work to integrate that. So thanks for bringing that point up. I meant to highlight that as part of my overview earlier. Great. Secretary Moore, anything you'd like to add before we open it up for discussion?
No, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any questions or thoughts from the board? All right. Well, if any thoughts or recommendations do come to mind, please feel free to reach out. We're going to be working on our work plan for the upcoming budget process in a little bit more detail following today's board meeting. And so we really do welcome input and look forward to working with you all on another budget cycle soon. All right, with that, we will move on to public comment. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen in just a second. Colleen, did we have anybody sign up ahead of time to comment?
Yeah, so the first person we had sign up was Pete Benevento.
Okay.
Is he?
I'm not seeing him,
Okay.
but I could have missed it.
I said that too. Okay, we'll move on. We also had Liz Curry sign up. I see Liz is here.
Welcome, Liz. Thanks for joining. Would you like to share your comment?
Good morning. Yes, thanks for this opportunity for public comment. My name is Liz Curry, and I have a consulting practice, Common Land Solutions. And I work with municipalities, nonprofits, and manufactured home communities as a project manager to pull together public grants and financing to implement infrastructure and property redevelopment projects. Right now, I'm working with 3 mobile home co-ops to redevelop their water and wastewater. 2 out of those 3 are subject to the 3-acre rule. There are 4 major players in this space right now that work with manufactured home co-ops. The Housing Foundation, Inc. is a subsidiary of the State Housing Authority, and they own a lot of parks. Addison County Community Trust is one of the most active nonprofits that owns a lot of parks. The Water Infrastructure Support Program is operated by Cooperative Development Institute. They help residents purchase their own parks. And then I work with 3 parks in partnership with Cooperative Development Institute. And all of us work in this space primarily from a affordable housing real estate development perspective. So this sector is very much a niche sector when it comes to infrastructure redevelopment. And it's quite different than the folks you normally work with in the clean water space. None of us have had time to follow this process closely because we're mostly dealing with planning and implementing redevelopment projects. But I did hear comments from the secretary earlier and have tried to ascertain what kind of changes might be on the horizon. Initially, when you designed the stormwater program for compliance, we heard about a linked deposit program. And I don't know if there's any proposed changes to that, but I want to ask that this board take a deeper dive into understanding the manufactured home community sector, because this is your environmental justice population that needs a different approach. Many of these parks right now are carrying high mortgage debt. Either residents have purchased and have used community development finance products, or the State Housing Authority has used bond products, but all of these financial products term out after 7 years and they have to refinance. And as we know, there's very little affordable money around. So they're carrying very high mortgage debt to begin with. Then when they take on drinking water and clean water infrastructure, they have to borrow the drinking water and the clean water SRF money. Those program leaders have become a bit more sensitized to the fact that the parks cannot support high debt, and they've offered lower interest rates on the clean water side to 1.5%, which is very helpful. And I would hope that you all would make that a permanent change for the mobile home sector. But the idea of taking on stormwater debt is just not realistic, especially through a private product like a link deposit. It's just not going to happen. We're going to be back in the same place where we were when parks were getting cited for drinking and stormwater violations, and even in the nonprofit sector could not comply with those enforcement because the idea of restructuring a park financially is kind of a year-long proposition before you even get into planning and developing the construction project. So the complexities of this sector are important for your department to understand. And you've got a group of staff people who have been managing the ARPA Healthy Homes Manufactured Home Communities program. And when that program ends, you're going to lose that knowledge that they've developed. And I would urge you to meet with us so that we can help you understand what would work in terms of designing some products. Of course, the easy answer is grants, but I see in your budget, you need some matching funds. We leverage a tremendous amount of housing dollars and private dollars to accomplish these projects. And I believe if you could assign a small group, a committee, to meet with us before you design your programs to understand this sector and understand how we operate in the real estate world, not in the clean water world that you all operate in. We have the same goals. We want safe, healthy, clean water for everyone. We have environmental justice goals, but what we need is a partnership to work with your department to understand this sector so that your environmental justice requirements can be met. Because otherwise, our only alternative is to go to the legislature and bring this to the folks who are looking at your statutory bills and your and the pieces of legislation. And we don't want to open a conversation with legislators before trying to come together with you all, come to the table, and be invited to the table. This is not the first time we've requested this. We requested this over the past year or two with the WID folks. We've requested to meet to talk with you about your programs and how we need to design them. So, we've got 7,000 households in mobile home parks, most of whom are under 50% of median income, which is about earning under $40,000 or $50,000 a year. So these folks are trapped. They don't know how to comply with your regulations. They need technical assistance from folks like us. Engineers don't know how to bring them through this process. So they need us as translators, and they need the nonprofits and the technical assistance providers to bring them through your programs. But we spend so much time and money that they're paying us to navigate these programs because they're not designed for this sector. So I would just like to ask you to consider taking a bit of time and staff capacity to kind of integrate the mobile home sector into your understanding of how clean water regulations and requirements affect them, and program designs that can be more cost effective for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Appreciate you taking the time to join us today. Colleen, did we have anybody else signed up to comment?
No.
Okay. Is there anybody else in attendance who would like to share a comment with the board? Feel free to raise your hand. Oh, hi, Claire. Thanks for joining. Go right ahead.
Good morning. I apologize that I didn't sign up for comment in advance, but thank you for the opportunity. I just wanted to share a quick update. My name's Claire Ireland. I'm here with the Vermont Association of Conservation Districts, and we wanted to just update a little bit about the federal funding freeze situation and its impact on this realm of project work that happens under to the goals of clean water here in Vermont. We've currently identified about $4 million of federal funds that are frozen, mostly through IRA funds, although also some through the bipartisan infrastructure law, the BIL funds, that were scheduled to come here into Vermont. And a lot of those do go into supporting, playing a part of project budgets that support clean water work, as well as support staffing, overall staffing within the organizations that do a lot of this clean water work. We are hopeful that the funding freeze will be lifted and that these funds will continue to flow as usual. But that has been a complicated process, and we're still facing a lot of uncertainty. Separate from this, the broader scope of what we think we're seeing in Vermont is, we have $4 million that we've identified. A lot of the other natural resource and environmental groups have identified separately another $6.6 million. So we are trying to keep an eye to this situation. Our concern is that, if these federal funds do not get released, if they're delayed, that we're going to start seeing clean water projects fall through, that the funds that are being leveraged are not, superfluous funds. They are actually critical load-bearing funds in the budgets of these projects. And so this is, I guess, just to give a little bit of an update that the longer this freeze lasts, the more projects are going to be in jeopardy of falling through and having to start from scratch and being redesigned, or having budgets redeveloped. This may also result, obviously, in a greater demand for clean water funds for project implementation if the funding does not get released as budgeted. As it relates to staffing, we are concerned that if we have to lay off staff, that this will further reduce the capacity we have in our overall system to do clean water work here in Vermont. We are, piecing together staff budgets, oftentimes using federal dollars. So this is all just to say, we're trying to pay attention to the situation. We're still hopeful that things will be resolved, but just a dynamic to keep on your radar. And separate to this, the conservation districts have a $3 million budget request with the legislature right now. We believe that we developed this request before the funding freeze, but we do believe that it's even more important now. It doesn't relate to the Clean Water Boards or the Clean Water Fund directly, but this $3 million is an investment in the system that goes into doing this clean water work. Conservation districts do act as technical service providers and program navigators, resource navigators, to help individual landowners and municipalities understand the system in place and navigate all of the grant funding requirements as well as the permitting requirements that go into making a clean water project happen. And so we believe that this blanket funding actually does just provide a catalyst to using clean water dollars more effectively and efficiently, and getting projects on the ground more quickly here in the state of Vermont, since we have quite a lot of work to do. So I just wanted to put that on your radar as well. Obviously, that's not a request to the Clean Water Board, but it's more of just an update on the overall status of the system that goes into making projects happen on the ground. We're hoping to continue all the good work, but as the situation does change, or as dollars that go to these project implementer organizations, I apologize, as those dollars get reduced, we may see a slowdown in work happening here in the state. So thank you.
Thank you, Claire, for your comment. Any other comment? Oh, yeah, Neil?
Chair Farnham, could I jump in very quickly on this topic? Thanks. So Claire, very much appreciate your comments, and we're kind of keeping tight track in DEC on where funding portals are either open or shut. And I just wanted to share with you that if you have the opportunity to let me know, or let Marley know, who can then bring that information up, what portals are closed to you right now. I know, for example, Lake Champlain Basin Program has some concerns, and I believe NRCS through RCPP right now has their portals closed. But if there are others, I'd really love to know about them, because we are keeping kind of track not only of state grants that we're administering downstream, but also would love to know where you guys are being affected outside of the Clean Water Fund and all that. So please let me know.
Thank you, Neil.
Yeah, I'll do my best to avoid being doomy or gloomy on Valentine's Day. But we have had it pretty good on the board for the last couple of years. The last time we faced, very uncomfortable, difficult decisions was at the beginning of the pandemic when we had massive reductions in some of our revenue sources and we had to decide which programs would receive funding cuts. I do think it's possible that this summer we'll have to have a conversation about, if the contingency reserve needs to be activated, if we need to make proposals for the Budget Adjustment Act in order to account for activity at the federal level, like how to support Vermont's priorities with the limited resources we have. And if the context changes, is the board going to need to recommend different levels of state funding? But I think we're going to need to gather information over the next couple of months. I don't think we'll be able to muffle the short-term impacts of some of these federal moves. So that is going to be painful to a lot of our partners. And I don't anticipate us having the ability to shield our partners from that, unfortunately. I've already seen it in a couple of projects where just the uncertainty has caused people to back away from something and to slow down. So I think we at the state level are trying to continue moving forward. Until something is frozen, we are assuming we're going to be able to get that money and move forward. And yes, ANRDC is spending a lot of time and energy in trying to make sure they have an awareness of what's happening. And I do think the board is likely going to have a vigorous discussion at some point in the late spring and summer about, okay, how does this context change what the board might recommend going forward?
Thank you, Chair Farnham. Okay. Any other comment at this time? Okay. With that, I think we can move on to our final agenda item, wrap up, summarize next steps, and some announcements and reminders. Okay, so the state fiscal year 2026 clean water budget will continue through the legislative review for authorization in the spring, and implementation begins in July of this year. The board will plan to reconvene in early summer of 2025 to kick off the upcoming budget process. But of course, if there's any circumstances that change that warrant us getting together sooner, we will work to arrange that. And if anybody has any suggestions for the upcoming budget process, we welcome your input and please feel free to reach out. I wanted to update the board also that our Vermont Clean Water Initiative 2024 performance report is submitted to the legislature and to the US EPA, and there's a link directing folks to that from the Clean Water Board webpage as well. And I believe I sent out an email to the board sharing those resources with you. It's an excellent compilation of all of the great work that's happening across the many federal and state agencies and partners on the ground to support clean water in Vermont. And we also have an interactive dashboard that allows you to interact with the data in a more multimedia manner. So welcome folks to take a look at that. There was also a January 23rd Clean Water Conversation public presentation on the report and dashboard, and there's a recording posted on our website and direct linked in the agenda. If you're interested in taking some time to review that presentation, I definitely encourage that. And shout out to Claire Madden on our team who led the report process and has been doing a number of different presentations on the report at the State House this session. And I also just want to say a shout out to the whole interagency work group that every year compiles data and works with us on putting together this report and providing input on the messaging and the narrative. We really appreciate the collaborative effort there. Our 2025 Clean Water Conversation series has launched. And this is a public presentation series that we put together each year that's led by our ECO AmeriCorps member in the Clean Water Initiative program. And this year's series is really centered around the partners that are making this work happen on the ground. And there's a direct link in the agenda to the webpage for that series where you can register and learn more about some of the upcoming talks and also to view recordings from past talks. As I mentioned, Claire did a talk on January 23rd about the performance report. And just yesterday, Allison from the Lakes and Ponds program did an excellent talk about lake watershed action plans. And there were some Lake Association members that were also featured in her presentation. So I encourage folks to take a look at that. And just another housekeeping reminder, we have a clean water stakeholder listserv. There's a direct link in the agenda to subscribe to that as well. So folks can be informed of upcoming Clean Water Board meetings, our public comment process, the Clean Water Conversation Series, other public events, and more. So I think those, oh, and I may just add one other update that our colleague Neil has assumed the role of Deputy Commissioner for the Department of Environmental Conservation. So just wanted to share congratulations to Heather. Neil, I don't know if there's anything personal you'd like to share, not to put you on the
No.
spot.
Thank you for calling that out, Emily. That's fine. No, that is true. I am. I've been asked by Secretary Moore and Commissioner Batchelder to serve as Deputy Commissioner for DEC, something I'm happy to do and a new challenge that I look forward to engaging. I am not going far. I will still continue to work with you all in the clean water space, which is something near and dear. And at the same time, we're actively recruiting the next director of the Water Investment Division. So, yep, please feel free to continue to work with me just as always. No change.
Thank you, Neil. Congratulations. All right, and
Oh, can I offer one comment too? I want to, Emily, say a particular thanks to you and Claire. As folks may be aware, about a third of the legislature is new this year. And so the importance of not just briefing them on where we are, but how we got here has taken on increased importance. And Emily and Claire have put together just a phenomenal presentation that they have given, I think, at least 4 times now by my count, if not more. And I see it as just so essential to continuing to be able to have the support for this work that we currently have. It's no small feat to see clean water funded consistently at this about $50 million a year of state funding for 8 years. We still have a ways to go, some challenging budget times that lie ahead. And I think helping legislators see the value and the impact of this work is really essential, and just want to thank Emily and her team for being integral in that successful effort.
thank you so much, Secretary Moore. I'll definitely pass along your remarks to Claire and the whole team. All right. With that, and thanks to you, Nick, as well, for all of your great work on the board, and welcome, Tim. I think we are set to close up the meeting for today, and great to see you all. Hope you have a great weekend, and we'll be in touch on next steps. Take care.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Great weekend.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Emily.
Thank you.